Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It's Friday, February 9th, 2024. Time to end the week and end it on a bang. I guess we got a, I don't know. Well, I was going to say, we got a big show planned for you today, but, well, we have it's a regular-sized show. It's no bigger than any other one. It's no smaller either. And of course, there's no planning whatsoever. So, really, it's a live from top to bottom. Hey, good morning. And it's time to start. All right. Filling you in on the news. The big issue of the day in the news, as it turns out, although most people aren't talking about it by morning, but certainly the evening news was, I guess, was it a relative surprise, the dropping of the special counsel report of the investigation into, oh yeah, Joe Biden actually had some classified documents in one of his offices after he left the vice presidency as well. And, well, on the one hand, the upshot of it is special counsel Robert Hur, in case you haven't retained that knowledge along the way, as I didn't, H-U-R, as in Ben. They could have named him Ben, yes, but they went with Robert on this one. Basically came to the conclusion that, yeah, there's really nothing we're going to charge you with criminally. But, of course, because it's a special counsel report and Republicans would cry if it didn't say that Joe Biden was terrible person or possibly worse in his retention of classified documents than Donald Trump was, then, you know, everything goes to hell. So you got to come up with something. So apparently the deal is that the special counsel decided that, well, he hasn't done anything criminal here, because my impression of what has happened here is that he's a kindly old man, well-meaning, well-intentioned, his heart's in the right place, but he's forgetful and doesn't have a great memory, which, of course, is exactly the sort of attack that Donald Trump was hoping to be able to launch against Biden, and has already launched against Biden. And so people wonder, what relevance does this really have to be put in a special counsel report? You're not charging him with anything, but you got to take a shot at him somehow? I took a look at some of the reports last night. They were still developing their stories, but now they're solidly done, even if the issue itself isn't particularly solid. So I'll just grab one here at the right here at the top from CNN under the headline of Biden slams special counsel Hur for raising son Beau's death. Yes, also in addition to not only dropping this thing, I guess the White House team decided that they were going to come straight out that night and arranged for a press conference, and Biden came out to address the nature of the report and to hit back and to remind everybody, yeah, he's still got it together and getting a little tired of these jokes. And he actually got off a pretty good zinger at some point, which I hope is in the write-up here. Anyway, let's see. Kanita Iyer is the reporter here, if I've got the name pronounced correctly. Biden slams special counsel Hur for raising son Beau's death. Yes, some part of the questioning was, I guess, around his placement of the chronology of events. And one of the milestone markers there was Beau's death, and I guess he had trouble placing it chronologically as to, with relation to what he had been doing with various documents at the time. I don't know. We'll take a look at this thing. And mostly it's been Biden's irritation with that topic even coming up. But President Joe Biden forcefully, he says, rejected the suggestion that he had trouble remembering when his son Beau had died. I doubt that he has no memory of when that happened, but he may have. Yeah, but it's the sort of thing that, you tend to remember the exact date of things like that. But okay. At any rate, special counsel Robert Hur claimed this in his scathing report released Thursday. But Biden Biden's pretty angry about that. How in the hell dare he raise that? A visibly angry Biden said Thursday night from the diplomatic reception room in the White House, where he delivered hastily scheduled remarks to address the special counsel's report on his handling of classified documents. Which, of course, at bottom, really are, what else are you supposed to be interested in besides, was anything illegal done you're going to charge him with? No? All right, we're done. Frankly, when I was asked that question, I thought to myself, wasn't any of their damn business. I'm not certain what the context of the questioning was yet, but we'll see. I don't need anyone to remind me when he passed away, Biden added, appearing emotional as he referenced a rosary he wears that had belonged to Beau. Every Memorial Day, we hold a service to remember him, attended by friends and family and the people who loved him, Biden said, and after a pause, added, I don't need anyone to remind me when he passed away. Beau Biden, an Iraq War veteran, of course, who served as the Attorney General of Delaware, died in 2015 after battling brain cancer. The 345-page report, there's one I won't be reading, has concluded that Biden willfully retained and disclosed classified military and national security information, but recommended he not face charges after a year-long investigation into his handling of the classified documents. Why not? Don't know. The report also mentioned apparent memory lapses, saying investigators found Biden's memory was significantly limited during interviews with his ghostwriter and an interview with Hur's office last year. According to the report, Biden, during the 2023 interview, did not remember when his son Beau died, nor the years he was vice president. Well, that doesn't sound so good, does it? The president, in his remarks, also fired back against Hur's note that he was not charged in part because a jury could potentially see him as a, quote, well-meaning elderly man with a poor memory. Not great. I am well-meaning, that's true, and I am an elderly man. Okay, that's pretty straightforward and honest, and I know what the hell I'm doing. I've been president. I've put this country back on its feet. I don't need his recommendation, Biden said. Pressed by CNN's MJ Lee, why he's the best candidate to beat former President Donald Trump, the GOP frontrunner, in the 2024 presidential election. Given voters' concerns about his age and mental acuity, Biden said he's the most qualified person in this country to be president of the United States and finish the job I started. And that is true. He's got the experience. And also, why am I the best person to defeat Donald Trump? Well, how many others have defeated Donald Trump for president in the past? One other one, Hillary Clinton, but as it turns out, we decided that the Electoral College was more important than the popular vote again. But this second time around, what can I tell you? The results are the results. Donald Trump lost both the electoral vote and the popular vote to one person in particular, and that's the guy you're talking to. So, not me. You're not talking to me. I'm talking to you. But we're talking about Joe Biden. And you don't need to remind me that he's president or what his name is. Sure, I have. Yeah, okay. Well, at any rate, that seems to be the heart of the controversy. And honestly, though, social media doesn't seem to exactly be aflame over this thing, which is good news. I'm happy to see that and happy to otherwise ignore it because, look, if you haven't got charges to bring, you're special counsel. If you haven't got charges to bring, I haven't got any interest in what you're doing. Can't help you. All right, so let's see. I know I have some interest in some other things, though. And there's been some stories circulating this morning, plus a few that we have missed over the past, week. Some older than that. You know how Fridays go. Tend to want to use this time to catch up on stories we've pocketed but put aside for one reason or another. One I don't know. This is a weird thing. I do want to make some note of this, but I'm not certain how much importance to place on it. It's just one of those things. Was only about a week ago, I guess, that we were telling you another similar story that we also didn't really know what to make of the MAGA-addled wackadoodle who murdered his father as I recall, during, I don't remember under the circumstances anymore. I mean, imagine putting this out of your mind. But he murdered his father and decapitated him, and I guess allegedly went on like a YouTube live stream and held up the head and went on a huge anti-government MAGA-style, QAnon-style rant, and very upsetting and weird and destructive, psychopathic, but it was what it was. And as it turns out, hardly a week has passed when we are confronted with another story of another QAnon-style, MAGA-style wackadoodle ranting about delusions about the deep state murdering his father. What is happening? Where are the fathers in all this, one might ask, as they used to do every time when they were trying to fill out, for instance, on Breitbart, on their black crime vertical. Where are the fathers? And now we know the answer on the white crime side of the ledger is all the fathers are being murdered by their wackadoodle sons. Well, I don't know why no one's asking that question anymore. And let's see. I don't know what else to tell you. There's, of course, this time in Florida. I think the last time was, well, we'll say not Florida, as I recall. But maybe it was. I don't even remember anymore. I'm surprised how little I remember about this. Didn't really want to spend that much time on it. But this time, Palm Beach County, no less. Stop, you are killing me, Dad pleads during Wellington's son's fatal attack, deputies say. Kind of a weird headline. Brian McGann Jr. is our perpetrator this time. Upset because he recently learned his father received the vaccine. Yeah. All right. No dramatic music plays. I assume that's the COVID vaccine, although really it could probably be any vaccine. And so last time around it was my father at some point in his past, whether it was current or recent past, I'm not sure, was a federal employee, and I hate the federal government, and so therefore decapitate my dad. And this time he got the vaccine, so there you have it. Scott Sutton is our writer for this article at WPTV.com, their online presence. A 44-year-old man, not a young kid, a youngster. He was in his 40s. He didn't know what he was doing. Right. Accused of violently attacking and killing his father Sunday night, was deemed by a longtime family friend as a, quote, delusional conspiracy theorist, according to a probable cause affidavit. It's I guess a welcome change from, I didn't see anything, he was a quiet loner, kept to himself, or everyone loved him, whatever. Can't believe he did this. The suspect, Brian McGann Jr. of Wellington, was arrested after Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office deputies found him with blood all over his body after he attempted to hide from law enforcement. You want to hide if you've got the blood all over your body. I can understand that, I guess. The fatal attack occurred just after 11 p.m. at a home located at 142 West Palmetto Road near Green Acres. If you're in the neighborhood and you want to do some ghastly sightseeing, I guess you can stop by. That's the local angle for you. Deputies said they went to the home after receiving a 911 call reporting a violent domestic disturbance. They probably thought, oh no, another one of these stupid swattings. But no. The 911 caller, a family friend, said McGann Jr. called her, and during the conversation she overheard the man's father, Brian McGann Sr., uttering, "Stop, you are killing." Now I thought the headline probably said you're killing me. I don't know whether that's supposed to have been understood or just got left out of the copy somehow, in a sloppy fashion. But that seemed kind of weird. During the conversation, "Hi, how you doing? What's new? Can I borrow a cup of sugar?" "Stop, you're killing me." Oh man. All right. Well, that sounded like it might have been his mother. But anyway, what? Like, how does that? I don't know. I don't know what that. You're having a conversation clearly about something else. You're not calling the neighbor and saying, "Oh, I'm murdering my dad and I wanted you to hear." I don't know if there's ever going to be an explanation of that. The friend reported to 911 that McGann Jr. appeared intoxicated and paranoid, also stating that he recently began using cocaine. That's another odd phrasing of these things. So what have you been up to lately? Well, I've recently begun using cocaine. Why? Amazing. I can't believe that you would tell me that. What happened to the Bears? Who owned the cocaine? Where did he go? Well, I don't know. I killed him for the cocaine, and my dad's next, I guess. Deputies responded to McGann Sr.'s home and found him lying unresponsive on the living room floor with his clothes completely covered in blood, with significant injuries to his face. Sounds particularly violent. It's terrible. Probable cause affidavit said there was blood all over the living room floor, spatter on the wall, and furniture encompassing Brian McGann Sr.'s body. Cop talk in your affidavit there, but that would be probable cause, I guess. Wow. Paramedics with Palm Beach County Fire Rescue responded to the home and pronounced the victim dead at 12:25 a.m. Monday. Palm Beach Medical Examiner's Office determined that McGann Sr. died from blunt force trauma. Detectives later spoke to the family friend who said she had talked to McGann Jr. earlier on Sunday, conversing on the phone for about 3 hours. I would call 911 just about that. The woman said McGann Jr. called her again at about 10:30 p.m. Sunday and told her to pack her belongings and leave the residence because he was going to be dead. He is the family friend planning on coming over to visit the dad? I don't understand, but I don't know. When we get half the detail like this, I don't know how much we really want. Anyway, you know what? I mean, honestly, I'm not going to... all I can do is end up being confused and or making fun of a situation that's actually horrific by reading the rest of this. It's just bizarre story. All that we really need to do is point out that it's two of, several hundred million of us out there, but I don't know. It's weird that in the space of a couple of weeks, we should see two conspiracy theorist psychotics murdering their family members. Although I suppose we're probably hearing about that, or it's probably happening a lot more often, and just not making national news and or being shared on social media. I don't know. Just very weird, very strange, and troubling. And, of course, I don't know. I can't imagine it having wackadoodle conspiracy theorists in charge of the government in Florida is doing anybody any favors. I didn't even get to the part about where they find out that he murdered him over the vaccine. But don't forget that, the government of Florida turned, vehemently anti-vaccine, including the installation of a surgeon general who is anti-vaccine, who's encouraging people not to get the vaccines. And DeSantis did all this, of course, in hopes of boosting his presidential campaign, which was an abysmal failure. He's back in Florida now, and Florida denizens are murdering one another over his rhetoric, which availed him nothing. So, I don't know. I thought I would maybe point that out at some point. Okay, one other item that we, we discussed this the other day. We brought up briefly at the beginning of the show the fact that during the New Hampshire primary, by the way, yes, they finished the the Nevada caucuses for the Republicans were held yesterday. That the orange guy won. So there is that. I mean, he was the only candidate at this point there because Nikki Haley was on the other thing, and when they did the primary ballot and they wouldn't let her into the caucus, so nothing was likely to happen there. But just by way of follow-up, that happened. But we also mentioned that during the New Hampshire primaries that someone had generated an AI-driven fake Biden voice audio robocall, and I don't know that I read about the details of it, but I have a link to it through a different sort of very Friday-ish story that ties this stuff together a little bit. But the background on the New Hampshire thing: AI robocalls impersonate President Biden in an apparent attempt to suppress votes in New Hampshire. Just so we can figure out what the details of this call were about. This is actually from PBS, their NewsHour website. And let's see, who are they? Oh, yes, okay. Ali Swenson from the Associated Press on this story, along with Will Weissert, also of the AP. Okay, and just being shared here by PBS. The New Hampshire Attorney General's office on Monday, and this was back at the end of January. This is dated January 22nd. So back then, the New Hampshire Attorney General's office said it was investigating reports of an apparent robocall that used artificial intelligence to mimic President Joe Biden's voice and discourage voters in the state from coming to the polls during Tuesday's primary election. There wasn't very much you could gain from that, but really, I mean, I guess it's also could be considered possibly a dry run for doing a similar thing during the general election, or just sort of expanding your ability to be a bad actor with AI audio. Attorney General John Formella said the recorded message, which was sent to multiple voters on Sunday, appears to be an illegal attempt to disrupt and suppress voting. He said voters should disregard the contents of this message entirely. The recording of the call, a recording reviewed by the AP, generates a voice similar to Biden's and employs his often used phrase, "What a bunch of malarkey." Well, that's a nice touch. It then tells the listener to, quote, "save your vote for the November election. Voting this Tuesday only enables the Republicans in their quest to elect Donald Trump again," the voice mimicking Biden says. "Your vote makes a difference in November, not this Tuesday." I see what they're trying to do, but as they point out helpfully, it is not true that voting in Tuesday's primary precludes voters from casting a ballot in November's general election. I could see why, certain people might become confused by that. Biden is not campaigning in New Hampshire, by the way. He wasn't at the time this was written anyway, and he didn't all the way through. And his name will not appear on Tuesday's primary ballot because their balloting is done. It's an old article. After, let's see, it's not known who's behind the calls. That's the part that we really need to get to. Though they falsely showed up to recipients as coming from the personal cell phone number of Kathy Sullivan, a former state Democratic Party chair who helps run Granite for America, a super PAC supporting the Biden write-in campaign. Sullivan said she alerted law enforcement and issued a complaint to the Attorney General after multiple voters in the state reported receiving the call Sunday night. "This call links back to my personal cell phone number without my permission," she said in a statement. "It's outright election interference and clearly an attempt to harass me," well, maybe, "and other New Hampshire voters who are planning to write in Joe Biden on Tuesday." It was unclear how many people received the call, but a spokesperson for Sullivan said she heard from at least a dozen people who received it. The Attorney General's office encouraged anyone who has received the call to email the State Department of Justice Election Law Unit. Gail Huntley, a 73-year-old Democrat in Hancock, New Hampshire, who plans to write in Biden's name on Tuesday, said she received the call at about 6:25 p.m. on Sunday. All right, well, lots of things happening in the evenings on Sundays these days. Anyway, it's an unusual thing, and it does say down here that generative AI deepfakes have already appeared in campaign ads in the 2024 presidential race. This wasn't the first time, I guess, and the technology has been misused to spread misinformation in multiple elections across the globe over the past year, from Slovakia to Indonesia and Taiwan. We have been concerned that generative AI would be weaponized in the upcoming election, and we're seeing what is surely a sign of things to come, said Hani Farid, an expert in digital forensics at the University of California, Berkeley, who reviewed the call recording and confirmed it is a relatively low-quality AI fake. So, anyway, point is that this is something to be looking out for. Whether or not they ever get to the bottom of this and decide who is in fact responsible, I still have not seen any information on that, but I guess the investigation is ongoing. And more to the larger point, I had grabbed this piece from techpolicy.press. How do you like that? .press. I don't think I've run into one of those yet. But Tech Policy has this article by one Tim Bernard, dated the 7th of February, so much more recent, under this headline, study suggests, a study, not that everyone should study it themselves, but study suggests we should worry about political micro-targeting powered by generative AI. A one-off from Let's Fake a Voice or Video with some interesting possibilities and some real dangers here. I'll read you a little bit of it, and then we'll take a short break, decide whether we return for the whole article. But ever since ChatGPT was released in late 2022, there's been considerable speculation about risks to society resulting from generative AI, but we have seen relatively few glimpses of these coming to fruition. Cheating on homework, we've seen stories about that. Lawyers citing hallucinated cases, that happens too, but also happens to federal judges. Maybe we'll get to that story as well today. And even the Taylor Swift images, as harmful as they may have been, may not have reached a civilizational danger level, but the Slovakian election affair, we should read a little bit about that, second reference to that, and the robocalls in New Hampshire are of serious concern. A recent study by 3 researchers at the University of Bristol investigates another fear that has been circulating. Could generative AI enable worryingly effective targeted political campaigns? That's the larger question here. We'll get to the rest of the article perhaps after the break, but you can see how this might be developing. You remember that back in the 2016 election, and to some extent in the 2020 election, the use of manipulative micro-targeting in the online advertising world, showing that, with the online advertising world versus print or radio or television, you could micro-target, test hundreds of different messages, get instantaneous feedback, and target them even more deeply each time. Well, if you had AI writing the copy, presumably that happens much faster and much easier. Hi everybody, it's me, David Waldman. Yes, the same guy who interrupts you all the time. Interrupting you one more time, just to tell you again, another reminder that your contributions are what keep this show on the air, and patreon.com, patreon.com, is still among the easiest ways to make the sustaining subscription donations that keep us afloat. Are you ready for the pep talk about how our Patreon campaign is still going strong and growing? Well, too bad. Yeah, the plain fact is we actually are headed in the wrong direction, and whereas we once had about 175 monthly patrons, we're now actually down below 150. Time to recruit some more. Not exactly the kind of news I wanted to share, but there it is. For those of you in a position to support the show, patreon.com does make it easy to make those secure, recurring monthly contributions to do so. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. We've been through a lot together. The worst of the pandemic, we hope. The worst of the insurrection, we hope. So go ahead and treat yourself. You don't need an excuse. Give yourself the gift of a little something you enjoy in life. Support the show. And of course, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running on those options too. So thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We couldn't, or at least shouldn't, do it without you. Hope you'll be on board soon too. Thanks for all your support. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. And guess what I found during the break? I found what the mighty OCD had found for me and put right in front of me. It is the answer to, I don't know if they ever found out who was behind the Biden robocalls, the fake Biden robocalls in New Hampshire. So one diversion from our larger story then, just to bring you up to speed on that. NBC News, Alex Seatswold, is it Seatswold? I don't know. Well, I'll have to go and ask him, I guess. New Hampshire Attorney General says he found the source of the fake Biden robocalls. New Hampshire's top law enforcement official said, "We have never seen such a blatant attempt to mislead voters." Well, not using a president's fake voice anyway, I'm sure. New Hampshire's Attorney General on Tuesday, that would be of this week, named a Texas telecom company as the source of an apparently AI-generated robocall impersonating President Joe Biden that told Democrats not to vote in last month's presidential primary. At a news conference in Concord, John Formella, a Republican, said that his office had opened a criminal investigation after it worked with the Federal Communications Commission and a private industry group to trace the source of those robocalls. NBC News was the first to report that the calls had been made to voters ahead of the January primary vote. Congratulations. Okay, get on with it. With artificial intelligence technology becoming more accessible, Formella said he and other law enforcement agencies want to make an example of the case to deter others from trying something similar ahead of the November election. We have never seen something so close to an election before and with such a blatant attempt to mislead voters, Formella said of the AI robocalls. We don't want this to be the first of many. Oh well. I think you're out of luck on that one, but good luck with the prosecution. I hope it works. The calls could violate New Hampshire election laws against voter suppression, in addition to federal telecom statutes, he adding that law enforcement is actively pursuing both civil and criminal actions against the companies allegedly behind the calls. From 5,000 to 25,000 people, somewhere in that large range, received these calls the weekend before the January 23rd primary. A sizable number, considering that fewer than 125,000 voters participated in the entire Democratic primary. The calls urged Democrats to save your vote until the November general election, giving the false impression that voters could only vote once. Formella said he could not say if the calls actually led anyone to stay home, but you would hope that in this whole idea of the tiny little state that takes voting so seriously and had been the first primary for so long, now no longer is. I mean, did they lose all their voting savvy in the 4 years since they went first? I don't know. Maybe, or has it been longer than that? Even so, I don't know. They seem to take their politics so seriously there, and of course all of them are in the state legislature. Seems like the worst possible state to target with stuff like that, but there are, of course, just like anywhere, there's going to be, normies that don't pay attention to stuff and aren't political junkies. They just happen to live in New Hampshire for no particular reason. I thought that was the whole reason for living in New Hampshire. Anyway, investigators traced the source of the call to Life Corp, a Texas telecom marketing company, Formella said, adding that it appeared to be owned by a man named Walter Monk. Formella declined to comment on the potential motivations behind the call, political or otherwise, nor did he say much about the company or its owner. We are confident this is the source of the calls, adding that the company had been involved with the Federal Communications Commission at one point. Formella's office sent Life Corp a cease and desist letter on Tuesday, ordering it to stop any further conduct that could be voter suppression under state law. Of course, that's easy. They have no reason to be calling into New Hampshire at this point. Limited information is readily available online about Monk or Life Corp, and the company does not appear to have a website. On LinkedIn, Walter Monk lists himself as a Dallas-based entrepreneur and the owner of or chief technology officer of two other communications companies. The owner of the LinkedIn profile did not immediately respond to a request for comment from NBC News. In 2003, the FCC issued an official citation to Life Corp and more than a dozen alias company names for making pre-recorded unsolicited advertisements to residential telephone lines in violation of federal telecom law. So it's happened before. The alias companies named in the citation appear to include dating businesses with names like The Dating Game and Single Stars. Another appeared to offer psychic services. Psychic Inroads, I guess, was one of the other aliases, and several others had names similar to major financial firms or credit card processors such as Fidelity Checks Incorporated and Midwest Card Services. So a scammer at heart, I guess. In a 2022 interview with a Fort Worth, Texas trade publication, Monk's age is listed as 69. Nice. And he is cited as the founder of a political polling company that employs 30 people. So, a fraudster and a pollster. Excellent. A search of Federal Election Commission data found no payments to a firm of that name. A search of political contributions from Monk turns up a single $5,000 check in 2008, plus another $5,000 on the same day from a person who appears to be Monk's wife. interesting, to a mysterious political group called PLR PAC. The group, known as a 527 for the portion of the tax code that governs it, appears to have spent nearly all of the $65,673 it raised on independent expenditures in support of then Republican candidate John McCain. There is little other trace of the group beyond that. Of course, that was in his presidential run. Formella cited another company, Lingo Telecom, also of Texas, as involved in the robocalls, as well as some companies he did not name, but declined to go into detail about their connection to calls. So maybe still a Brad Parscale connection in there. No one knows. According to Lingo Telecom's website, it serves over 120,000 customers and has operations in Dallas. Formella's office said Lingo suspended services to Life Corp after being informed of the investigation. New Hampshire officials, working hard to protect their first-in-the-nation primary after the Democratic National Committee tried to end it, took the issue seriously. Well, it is ended. But they took this issue seriously, and the state attorney general's office announced an investigation hours after NBC News first reported the fake Biden robocalls. All right. Well, at any rate, the big takeaway from this, according to Formella's office, is we are aware of this becoming a growing problem. We are wary of it and going to do what we can to stop it by making an example of these guys. Now, it may be, like we were hinting before as we began to read this Tech Policy Press or .press story about the way AI might be used in other ways. I think if you're thinking you put a lid on it by cracking down on AI-generated audio and robocalls, they may be 10 steps ahead of us on this one. All right, well, here's the story. As we said, ever since ChatGPT was released, we've heard all sorts of stories. Kids using it to cheat on homework, lawyers using it to write briefs and end up inventing hallucinated cases and listing them, huge problem. The Taylor Swift fakes, and then, of course, other issues of using it directly in campaigns. Again, that we still have to check back in on what happened in Slovakia. Now we know what happened in New Hampshire. But I think they might be thinking ahead towards operations like, I finally remembered who we were talking about here. Cambridge Analytica you'll remember that name, the operation behind a lot of the the massive numbers of online advertisements on, channeled through Facebook and other social media, et cetera, plus just targeted advertising to various users. And, of course, they can tailor that based on your search history and any other information they might have about you. And it was a sort of a fascinating thing to find out in 2016, the extent to which the operators, particularly in the Trump campaign, were micro-targeting people and tailoring messaging. And of course, doing it with no particular scruples about whether or not they were telling the truth or whatever. Just whatever message worked best, particularly in motivating low-frequency voters, which is kind of how they were able to produce this sort of wave of voters that everybody else, or potential voters that everybody else sort of ignored for the longest time, so that Democrats could increase their base turnout but still lose the election, at least in certain states, certain key states, overwhelmed as they were by the number of people who almost never come out to vote, but somehow were motivated to do so, and as it turns out, may have been motivated to do so by micro-targeted advertising sent to them. And although the fact that the ads are served to them via computer, I mean, that enabled them to hit them more frequently than you'd ever be able to reach them on TV or radio with the same budget, but also to target the message to them specifically. And if you're really lying your ass off, avoid detection by not having to broadcast the lie so widely on television such that people in enforcement would see it, detect it, and come after you. But there's still a tremendous amount of work involved in tweaking the content. and making sure, I mean, there's lots of work involved in making sure it gets served up to the right people and doing the targeting. But I guess before the internet age, this was prohibitive in terms of its cost and just your ability to do it within the time allotted for an election and have it make sense. But now that there's a virtually costless delivery system, the only cost was in the targeting and tweaking the copy. And now the new worry is that generative AI will take care of tweaking the copy or even imagining the stories that might work best with certain people. And all you have to do is worry about the targeting and compiling the data and analyzing the data. Cuts back on a number of people you need for an operation like this, and you might be able to do it with surprising sophistication through AI. So, as the story continues, this is not a new fear. If I had read this, I would have been reminded right here who it was I was thinking of. As the paper that they're discussing in this article spells out, Cambridge Analytica, there's the name, I could have just waited, claimed to be able to use Facebook data to establish individuals' personality traits, remember this, and use this information to create remarkably persuasive political campaigns. Right. Well, what if they didn't actually have to do the creation of those campaigns, but they could have generative AI do that? Oh, well, that would be easy. Great. Let's try that. Public exposure of these claims, along with a range of malfeasances by the company, and the fact that they had worked for some successful but controversial causes, including the Trump 2016 presidential campaign and the Brexit Leave campaign, caused significant concern. Later revelations, however, suggested that Cambridge Analytica did not, in fact, have the abilities it claimed, but could future attempts to combine vast amounts of personal data, whether slashing around on social media platforms or on the servers of data brokers, with political communications, deliver on the basic premise of the now defunct company's sales pitch? Indeed, the new research purports to demonstrate that this time is different. The authors cite several past studies from recent years as providing the foundation for this one. The first major building block is research that establishes that personal attributes, including Big Five personality attributes, that's in scare quotes there, but not sure what they're referring to, but I guess if you're a psychology major, maybe you do. Maybe they'll discuss them with us later. But right. So the first building block is research that establishes that personal attributes, including Big Five personality attributes, can be reliably inferred from online information. The second is that micro-targeting individuals with messages tailored to their own attributes has been shown to be more persuasive in certain situations to a statistically significant degree. Where does generative AI come in? The technology has the power to make the previously very labor-intensive work of micro-targeting easily scalable if it can, first, customize political messaging copy for different segments of the audience, and, secondly, validate that the generated text will appeal to the intended segment. Although really no skin off their nose if it doesn't. They can come back in 15 minutes with a different one, or they can come back these days in 15 seconds with a different one. The researchers pursued these questions in two sets of studies. Study 1 took real political ads from Facebook, used a large language model, or LLM, that always confuses me, a master of letters or master of laws uses the same abbreviation, right? I think that's very interesting. They've all gone abroad and gotten a master's degree. Anyway, study 1 took a look at real political ads from Facebook using a large language model to rate them for attractiveness for the openness to experience personality dimension, and asked subjects to rate them for perceived persuasiveness and then take a test to establish a score for their openness to experience personality trait. This study showed positive results indicating that the models could, in effect, identify what messages would be most persuasive for people with different degrees of a well-established personality trait. Study 2 used LLMs to generate different versions of existing political ads. one for those with high openness scores and one for those with low openness scores. Since Study 1 had already established that the models could identify persuasive messages for those with differing scores, the generated messages were evaluated by LLM to validate their targeting effectiveness. Taken together, the paper's studies suggest that LLMs can be used to easily develop effectively micro-targeted political ads at scale. The magnitude of the effect of the ads in the experiments was fairly small, but as the authors point out, in close elections, a small proportion of extra voters can make all the difference. This is of particular concern in democracies such as the U.S., where the results in closely divided swing states can decide the presidential election by just a few thousand votes. You know, as has happened once or twice. The paper explicitly identifies this ability as a threat to fair elections, noting that micro-targeted content could be untruthful or manipulated or both, and claiming that the benefits of the technology will go to the largest campaigns. Others have acclaimed the technology for its ability to level the playing field and enable small campaigns to take advantage of techniques already in use by the giants. That's an interesting point. The authors offer their findings up as evidence for regulators and policymakers to take into account and offer one suggestion of their own, that a predictive model could be developed, presumably by email services and ad platforms, to alert users when they are viewing micro-targeted campaign content, thus blunting its effectiveness. Ooh, that's interesting. I wonder if people would see and understand. It is clear that campaigns will use any legal, hopefully, means at their disposal to enhance their results, and so if this method does indeed work, it will be used. The maker of one of the more well-known generative AI platforms, one of the systems used in the study, it notes, would like its products not to be used for such campaigns at scale, but while OpenAI's policy prohibits building custom applications using their API for campaign work, there are other models out there, including open source ones, and companies that specialize in using AI for political campaigns already exist. You want to know who they are? They point to two different websites here. One, Sterling.ai, and one called Quiller.ai. But Quiller wasn't, oh no, it was Quillette, right? I'm just like, wasn't Quiller one of those, what would they call themselves? The sort of weirdo, like, dark web intellectual type publications or something like that. But that was, I'm thinking of Quillette. Now, do I have that wrong? Am I making an incorrect association here? I don't think so, actually. Let me look at it. Quillette. Free thought lives. Nonpartisan journalism. And I don't know who's still associated with the place, but I don't know. Found it to be somewhat, I don't know, somehow it occupies a weird corner of my mind there. But at any rate, how did they get I can't recall exactly how they splashed into the headlines, but yes, I think I do remember them correctly, my idea. But it's different people anyway, or maybe it is. I don't know. Maybe they are related. But right now they just have a similar sounding name. Anyway, let's conclude here this article. Expecting platforms to develop and implement effective countermeasures may be rather optimistic. But even without specific information about which communications are micro-targeted, the public may still adapt. If micro-targeted ads become the new normal in and out of politics, just as targeted ads have done, we do not know if their extra measure of efficacy, as confirmed in this paper, will be able to endure. Either way, the wave of 2024 elections across the world will likely see a few live experiments. So you can definitely expect, I think, to see that being put into practice. And it's a little worrisome, and I don't know how you combat it, but except right now to raise awareness of it and hope that you and others like you are talking to enough people to be able to wake people up to the prospect of manipulation this way. And wow. Well, see what we can do to combat this. Okay, let's see. Lots of other directions we can go, and so many interesting ones here. Let's see what we might be able to put together. You know what? Here's one I definitely meant to graft onto this storyline, just so you know. Wired magazine reports, I guess, with respect to the New Hampshire story, that AI-generated voices in robocalls are now illegal. Sort of, I guess. A month after the mysterious Biden calls in New Hampshire, the FCC can now go after robocall scammers that use AI voice clones. Let's see by what mechanism they did that. It is now illegal, says our writer here, McKenna Kelly. There it is. I love all these layouts. Are very creative, lovely online magazine layouts that make it difficult to find reliably where the author's name is going to be. But it is now illegal in the U.S. for robocallers to use AI-generated voices, thanks to a new ruling by the FCC on Thursday, so just recently. We'll see whether it stands up in court. And how broad is that? I have a feeling they may have overstated the case here. Illegal for robocallers to use AI-generated voices? That can't really be true, is it? Maybe not fake celebrity voices. You've read... the next line tells me more of the news. You want to know what the news is? Remember, this is Wired. They're a subscription magazine. You've read your last complimentary article this month. Subscribe now if you're or click here to sign in if you're already a subscriber. Unfortunately, I'm not. So, wink, wink. There's a way to read it even in someone as tech savvy as Wired magazine. Sorry to say that we're depriving you of the income you need, but I don't know. Hey, maybe that's the pitch. I do need to refresh all of my my own fake ads calling for submissions and donations. They're all going on a year plus old already, if not even older. But we can do that. Yeah, just donate specifically so that we can redistribute the money by subscribing to more newspapers and magazines, although I don't know that Wired would make the list necessarily. We do read a couple of those every, say, month or so. Clearly, I've read more than I'm entitled to on a free basis, so maybe that's an indication. Anyway, tell us all about it, Wired. It is illegal now, according to a FCC decision from Thursday, and a unanimous decision, no less. The FCC expands the Telephone Consumer Protection Act, or TCPA, to cover robocall scams that contain AI voice clones. I think that's the key part there, the clone. The new rule goes into effect immediately, allowing for the commission to fine companies and block providers from making these types of calls. Someone will, of course, sue about its constitutionality or whatever, but bad actors are using AI-generated voices in unsolicited robocalls to extort vulnerable family members, imitate celebrities, not intimate, but okay. Although those kinds of celebrities too, like maybe that's Stormy Daniels. Is she an intimate celebrity? Anyway, it's really not, it's not indicative of intimacy at all, really, honestly. You gotta stop making that mistake. Anyway, bad actors are using AI-generated voices in unsolicited robocalls to extort vulnerable family members. That's big. I think probably the bigger problem, or the more worrisome problem than the political application. Although, the political application is pretty dangerous societally. But I've been hearing stories that I wasn't sure whether they were urban myths or horror stories or what, of people being scammed by calls that are cloning the voices of relatives to ask for money, which is kind of weird. But, I guess that must, maybe it's not happening. Maybe it's like litter boxes and the FCC. I don't know if the FCC is any smarter than the rest of the country. Anyway, it's illegal. And you also can't imitate celebrities or misinform voters. That, according to FCC Chairwoman Jessica Rosenworcel. Is that right? Do I have that even close? She said in a statement on Thursday, "We're putting the fraudsters behind these robocalls on notice. The move comes a few days after the FCC and New Hampshire Attorney General John Formella identified Life Corporation as the company behind the mysterious robocalls imitating President Joe Biden last month before the state's primary election. At a Tuesday press conference, Formella said that his office had opened a criminal investigation into the matter and into the company and its owner, Walter Monk. The FCC first announced its plan to outlaw AI-generated robocall scams by updating the TCPA last week, so that's pretty swift action there. The agency has used the law in the past to go after junk callers, including the conservative activists and pranksters Jacob Wall and Jack Berkman. That's good. In 2021, the FCC fined them both more than $5 million for conducting a massive robocalling scheme to discourage voters from voting by mail in the 2020 election. How much of that money have they netted? I'm wondering. Why are they free if they can't pay? While this generative AI technology is new and it poses a lot of challenges, we already have a lot of the tools that we need to grapple with that challenge. Nicholas Garcia, policy counsel at Public Knowledge, tells Wired, we can apply existing laws like the TCPA, and a regulatory agency like the FCC has the flexibility and the expertise to go in and respond to these threats in real time. Okay, so maybe no legislation necessary on that. They already had the TCPA, and they can, by federal rulemaking, expand its applicability and application. Unless, of course, we find that the first perpetrators arrested under this new interpretation challenge the constitutionality or otherwise challenge the legality of these new provisions, which, of course, they will do. But we'll see how well it stands up to their challenges. All right, let's see. Some of these other things I got to click through because of the limitations of Pocket to see if we can figure out. This one clearly didn't work out very well. All right. Well, it's time for another break anyway, so we'll get rid of this. I wonder what interesting piece of information this was supposed to have linked to, but you are now missing out on. All right. Anyway, we got another hour show here yet to go, and lots of stories to pull up, some of which very recent and current and important to know in interpreting current events. The others, maybe back currents in a wider view of, the end of society, the collapse of civilization. Maybe not. Then again, maybe more stories about Taylor Swift and how she's going to overturn the Western order at the Super Bowl this weekend. Oh, right, and I'm not even supposed to say Super Bowl. All right, well, that was an AI-generated voice that did that. Arrest that scammer. It wasn't me. Don't look at me. I didn't do it. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Where to next? Let's see. Oh, and I've been distracted during our 1-minute break. Lots of things to... I'm reminded of just how many things there are that we could share with you. Let me start with this one, because reasons. He's in the news again. Matthew Kacsmaryk, the lone judge in the Northern District of Texas federal courts, and a favorite stop for judge shoppers for various reasons. Most recently, I believe, wasn't Ronnie Jackson in front of him looking to put a stop to, I don't even remember what federal policy it was this time around, but perhaps we'll be reminded of it. But we were also reminded that he was, I guess, first launched into national consciousness with the mifepristone cases. Well, the folks over at Lawyers, Guns, and Money have a new angle on this one. Cheryl Rofer, in particular, the author of this piece, under this title, I'm sure the Supreme Court will want to use only the best scientific evidence. Of course, that's got to be tongue-in-cheek. It turns out, she begins, that the publisher is retracting 3 papers on which Judge Matthew Kacsmaryk based his opinion that the FDA had not properly approved the drug mifepristone, used, of course, in abortions. You remember the case, and you remember the name, and you remember the audacity with which the judge acted, trying to block national distribution of mifepristone, saying, 25 years ago when the FDA first approved it for use, they did so incorrectly. And although it would seem like a quarter century of successful use was evident enough, there has to be some scientific evidence to back up an upending of practice like this, right? Well, here are 3 papers that say that it's much more dangerous or harmful than the FDA was willing to admit because they rushed or half-assed the approval process, and so therefore, yada, yada, something, something, something. Well, as it turns out, the 3 papers on which he relied essentially have been reversed by the Supreme Court. Just as we were discussing yesterday and the day before, that the impeachment of Alejandro Mayorkas is claiming that he had violated various federal laws or failed to implement certain federal laws or had violated certain court decisions about how those laws ought to be applied and executed, which turned out to have been reversed by the Supreme Court. It will get you in a lot of trouble ordinarily if you're working in a court of law, if you are citing cases that are no longer good law. And, if they can prove that you did it intentionally, you really are in trouble. You can find yourself sanctioned by the court, disbarred, what have you, but you can certainly be given a stern talking to even if you do it by accident. Well, as it turns out, he's not a Supreme Court Justice, Kacsmaryk, thank God, not yet, maybe next week, but whatever. So there's a code of ethics that they can, in fact, enforce against him. And, who knows, maybe they would actually do it, too. But here, as it turns out, he's been basing his decisions, including various nationwide restraining orders, etc., on faulty information, though they hadn't been withdrawn. Maybe the papers hadn't been withdrawn when he was leaning on them. Now that they have been withdrawn, of course, he should revisit this case. Will he? Without being forced to? I don't know. So, how do you like that? It turns out that and this is linked here, it turns out to where? MSNBC. Maybe this will be better background before we get into the legal analysis of this. This from the Readout, the Joy Reid program's blog, written by Jahan Jones, who covered this story just 2 days ago. Conservative judge relied on now retracted studies to outlaw mifepristone. Last year, Judge Matthew Kacsmaryk ruled against the distribution of the abortion pill, and now a medical journal that he cited has retracted the studies that he used. Let's use this as a launching pad and then return to the legal analysis. When U.S. District Judge Matthew Kacsmaryk issued his ruling last year banning distribution of mifepristone, a commonly used abortion pill, it seemed fairly clear that the conservative judge had taken a political approach to his decision, and now a medical journal has made that even clearer. Kacsmaryk's ruling has been put on hold as the Supreme Court prepares to hear an appeal next month, but in the meantime, it's being exposed for having relied on pseudoscientific conclusions. On Monday, Sage Publications announced that it was retracting 3 articles that helped to form the basis of Kacsmaryk's conclusion that access to mifepristone should be restricted. Here, a quote, I guess, from Sage Publications. 2 subject matter experts undertook an independent post-publication peer review of the 3 articles anew. In the 2021 and 2022 articles, which rely on the same data set, both experts identified fundamental problems with the study design and methodology, unjustified or incorrect factual assumptions, material errors in the author's analysis of the data, and misleading presentations of the data that, in their opinions, demonstrate a lack of scientific rigor and invalidate the author's conclusions, in whole or in part. In the 2019 article, which relies on a different data set, both experts identified unsupported assumptions and misleading presentations of the findings that, in their opinions, demonstrate, I guess these are the terms of art that they need here, that lack of scientific rigor and render the author's conclusion unreliable. Sage found, for example, now we're outside of their quote, that with the 2021 study cited by Kacsmaryk, all but one of the 8 authors were affiliated with an anti-abortion advocacy organization despite having declared that they had no conflicts of interest. That's not good. The investigation also discovered that a peer reviewer who initially reviewed that study had also been affiliated with one of these groups, the Charlotte Lozier Institute, as well. The lead author of the 3 articles, James Studnicki, I have no idea where you pronounce that one or where the emphasis belongs. He told Retraction Watch that the retractions, and did you even know there was such a site? That sounds useful. That the retractions were a blatant attempt to discredit excellent research, which is incongruent with a preferred abortion narrative. Sage's investigation came about after pharmaceutical sciences professor Chris Adkins notified Sage about potential issues with the studies. He explained to State's newsroom why he had done so, saying, "I have significant concerns about the merits, legality, and use of shoddy studies and personal anecdotes to upend national health care policies." Oh, I do too. "That are essential to women's reproductive health and bodily autonomy. To go out and say this drug needs to be, removed from the market, it's not honestly paying tribute to what the true science is really saying. It's good that Sage ruled that Kacsmaryk's findings essentially amounted to conservative propaganda. However, none of us can assume that the current Supreme Court, packed with anti-abortion justices, will reach the same conclusion." Thank you. There, Jahan Jones, I think, puts the finest point possible on that. And now, perhaps a little more legal analysis in depth from folks over at, Cheryl Rofer, as I mentioned, over at lawyersgunsmoney.com or lawyersgunsmoneyblog.com. We would know it as Lawyers, Guns, and Money. So, as we said, it turns out that the publisher is retracting those 3 papers that Kacsmaryk relied on. So, who knew the forced pregnancy faction lies? What a surprise, right? The publisher involved is reputable, and many journals require a statement of possible conflicts of interest. Lying on those statements is cause for retracting the paper. But it's worse than that. When questions were raised about the paper, a second peer review was done. Thanks, it says here, to Jay in the comments, I guess, for bringing this second peer review to Cheryl's attention. 2 subject matter, actually, it's quite similar to what we just read in the previous article. The 2 subject matter experts undertook the independent post-publication peer review of the 3 articles, right? Anyway, I guess, look at that. I thought that this was a much longer article, but I guess it's mostly comments, which are always perhaps worth reading if you want to dive deep into this. But, okay, the actual article itself doesn't contain much more in the way of legal analysis. So I guess job done here. Didn't mean to usurp your role in it there, Cheryl. But, both you and Jahan have done an admirable job in bringing our attention to explaining what's going on. I think, I guess starting with Lawyers, Guns, and Money on this is a little bit like starting with Empty Wheel on something. You might need a little primer of background in layman's terms before we get to the analysis part. But not such a complicated article this time in Lawyers, Guns, and Money. But okay, just wanted to bring that one to your attention. It's important, and I thought there was an interesting parallel to some of the cases we were discussing earlier in the week, not a court case per se, but the impeachment, the Mayorkas impeachment, and a growing trend really even in the courtrooms, in conservative jurisprudence in particular, the number of things that are decided even at the Supreme Court level that just turn out not to be true. These weird, from the creation of a laboratory creation of the perfect plaintiff to bring a certain kind of case that would achieve a certain end, only to find out later on that plaintiff either doesn't really exist or doesn't really exist in the form in which it was presented. Right? Cake bakers who were never asked, or photographers or wedding photographers or whatever, who were never asked to actually contract their services for same-sex weddings, but just hypothetically worried that that was going to be the case or whatever, or pretended that it was the case long enough to get their case into court, or various Supreme Court decisions rendered in the past over urban myths, essentially, or things that had been hyped up on right-wing radio, broccoli mandates, Cornhusker kickbacks that didn't occur, although that one at least had some basis in reality, even if it never made it to the final version of the legislation at hand. But just a growing and worrisome trend of just inventing factual basis for things and then enshrining them in Supreme Court opinions, which then get cited as precedent and take on a life of their own. It's maybe the only place that you can just make your facts up and no one can stop you, and you can control policy going forward based on made up facts. It's one of the real downsides of having no actual enforceable code of ethics for the Supreme Court. It's not just that Clarence Thomas and others could possibly just be bribed outright and not face any consequences, but that you can make up the facts that underlie an otherwise misguided and wrong-headed Supreme Court opinion that can affect the way the rest of the law is interpreted forever, even unrelated law, as we all saw just the other day, finding out that, what was it, the asphalt case that got cited as a major part of the case against Trump's claims about presidential immunity. And by the way, I did look that up just to see, well, why is this asphalt case, whatever it was, actually relevant? The asphalt case had to do with not the immunity per se. Pardon me, I had to excuse myself for a sneeze there. That doesn't happen all that often, but had not to do with presidential immunity, obviously. That's not what's at play in an asphalt company, but rather the availability of interlocutory appeals and the like, and whether or not the case can go forward even if the courts decide that you're not entitled to appeal this particular question at this point in the proceedings. It would, where one party says it's absolutely essential to the fair administration of justice that this question be settled first, and the other side says, not so much. Actually, we could probably proceed with the trial, and if the other side is unhappy with the outcome, they can at that point appeal and say, this should never have gotten to this point because we should have settled this question earlier. If your interest in justice can be satisfied with addressing this question on post-trial appeal, then that ought to be the preference. And that's what the asphalt case, I guess, stood for here. In D.C. Circuit's decision to go forward, they said, listen, we can get the trial started again. There's no reason to delay. The asphalt case tells us that there's nothing inherently destructive, nothing so prejudicial to your case by not treating this on an interlocutory basis that we can't go forward. And that's what that was about, not presidential immunity. But as you can see, you make analogies to all sorts of cases when you set down Supreme Court precedent. And if it's based on fake science or fake anything, that can have wide-ranging effects. All right. So, a couple of other things to share with you. I wanted to double back on a story I told you yesterday about the Guardian Angels incident in New York. I thought it might be of some interest to double back on it and offer yet another piece from Philip Bump, quickly becoming one of the favorites on the show. But he wanted to take a look at this one. Right-wing rhetoric got a guy from the Bronx roughed up in Times Square. That's clearly true. I'd like to see what he wanted to add to the picture here. The prepared remarks for Donald Trump's first speech as a presidential candidate in 2015 offered at his campaign announcement, you remember the big golden escalator, did not include any mention of immigrants from Mexico being rapists or criminals. He ad-libbed that. That is interesting to note. Perhaps it was because he'd seen the story about it on Fox News that morning. Who knows? And now we know that that was his general MO, so probably yes. But this was the catalyst for everything that has followed since. It triggered a public backlash that drew enormous attention to his claims and his candidacy, and instead of backing down on the falsehoods that drew the attention to the comments, he made immigration and its purported dangers a centerpiece of his campaign. It's another sort of interesting parallel to the power of bad or fake information worming its way into public discourse. It doesn't need to be enshrined in a Supreme Court opinion in order to have ill effects downstream. It could be, let's say, blurted out by a person who was running for president who also happened to believe, or would later come to believe, that he should enjoy absolute immunity for everything forever, forward and backward, if he actually succeeds in becoming president, whether it's because he succeeded in winning the election or just stole it. And here we are now finding ourselves with national policy of beating up anybody that might be an immigrant, or at least the de facto policy of being able to get away with it in certain corners. Anyway, why? Because it was planted in his head by Fox News. Who knew? I don't think even Fox News knew how successful that story was going to be. So, this, of course, was the catalyst for everything that followed since. It triggered a public backlash that drew enormous attention to his claims, right? Made him famous, and voila, all of a sudden he's president. As has so often been the case, he and his rhetoric from Fox News were pointed in the same direction in an effort to appeal to the same audience. Fear-mongering about immigrants and crime got views, and it got votes, and so it got deployed. A bit over 8 years later, Trump is again running for president, and his allies, now far more beholden to him than they were back in June of 2015, are again focused heavily on the dangers of immigrants. The increase in people entering the United States over the Mexico border has been fodder for right-wing media for months now, years really, with Republicans clearly eyeing the issue as useful for the upcoming general elections. Discussions about the border are generally framed in frightening, if not apocalyptic, terms. That's a parenthetical. It really should, the emphasis should have been frightening, if not apocalyptic terms. It's not that he's excusing them as being non-apocalyptic. He's actually lifting it to that level where it belongs. So discussions about the border are generally framed in those frightening terms, with both old favorites, terrorists are sneaking in. Remember that one? I mean, they still do say that, but that had a lot more power a few years ago. And new rhetoric. Many of them are military-aged males. Remember that from just last week. Helping to color perceptions of the issue. And, of course, to color how voters view President Biden or his all but certain challenger in November, Donald Trump. Fox News has, of course, played a predictably central role here. Since Biden took office, Fox News has mentioned migrants or immigrants almost 5 times as often on average as CNN has. Fox News has mentioned crime 2.5 times as often each month on average, despite crime rates dropping over the past 2 years. Fox News also talks about crime and migrants together more often, and so far in 2024, Fox News has mentioned both subjects in the same 30-second period more than 150 times. And remember, it's only February 9th. CNN and MSNBC have done so about 30 times cumulatively, but the right-wing channel knows what its audience wants, just as it did back in 2015. So on Tuesday night, host Sean Hannity began by lamenting how dangerous New York City has become, thanks to the influx of immigrants. The, quote, disastrous illegal immigration policies, unquote, of Mayor Eric Adams, Hannity claims, are wreaking havoc all over New York City. After suggesting that Adams blamed racism for criticism of his performance, Hannity teased an upcoming interview with Curtis Sliwa, the founder of the anti-crime organization, or actually pro-crime organization, just anti-everybody else's crime, Guardian Angels, to discuss the subject. It's important to understand Sliwa's role here. Back in the 1970s, during an era in which crime was rampant in the city, Sliwa started the Guardian Angels to serve as a civilian-centered backstop to the overwhelmed New York Police Department. The group often tipped over into vigilantism, and Sliwa would later admit, by the way, that he, to continue our theme for the day, invented some of its successes for public relations value. And now he gets to walk around as the warlord of New York City because of urban myth-making in which he claimed to have been really helping everybody by stopping terrible, vicious, awful crimes, even though he was just making it up. Sliwa is a character from the old days of New York City, the era in which Trump and former Mayor Rudy Giuliani were ascendant. In recent years, he's joined them politically and rhetorically. He ran against Adams for mayor in 2021 as a Republican, with Giuliani often appearing at his side. Now, of course, that's a huge embarrassment, but he'll still do it if Giuliani isn't in jail. The Guardian Angels had a bit of a rebirth as crime rose in New York in the wake of the pandemic, and Sliwa tried to parlay concerns about crime into political power. Well, he failed. Adams won, and crime dropped. Well, not necessarily hand in hand there, but here he was on Fox News Tuesday night, live from Times Square, which is no longer nearly the danger that it once was when the Guardian Angels were first formed, but okay. Around him stood a number of Guardian Angels in the group's trademark red berets and red jackets. Sliwa's red jacket, though, advertised something else. Sliwa for mayor. Hannity jumped right in, teeing up Sliwa to go after Adams and to talk about immigrants and crime. He mentioned video, hyped relentlessly by Fox, showing several immigrants scuffling with police. Curtis, he prompted, are things getting better in New York City? As you'd expect, Sliwa did not think they are. He bashed Adams in hyperbolic and inaccurate terms, specifically on his handling of immigrants. This mayor just doesn't seem to get it. He takes care of the illegal aliens and forsakes his own people, he said, especially the African-American poor and impoverished. Oh, his big concern, of course. Who elected him mayor of the city of New York over me, Curtis Sliwa. Politics and immigration intertwined. As he got done speaking, of course, the Guardian Angel standing around him began to walk off screen. Hannity asked the question about a pilot program from the city aimed at reducing the cost of feeding recently arrived migrants, but Sliwa directed his attention to a scuffle behind the camera. Our guys have just taken down one of the migrant guys, right here on the corner of 42nd and 7th. They've taken over. The audio dropped out. Several people in red jackets could be seen grabbing and wrestling with a man wearing glasses and a jacket. You wouldn't wrestle with a guy wearing glasses, would you? After a few seconds, Hannity cut away to a different story, but he welcomed Sliwa back at the end of the show to explain what happened. And, of course, that was when he made these claims that he was shoplifting, which, of course, he was not. He went on for some time about this, and remember the stupid quotes, the violence celebrated in the quotes, which wasn't really reflected in the video. But he was exaggerating how effective they had been at kicking this guy's ass, for one thing. But then he lied that he'd been shoplifting. The Guardian Angels spotted him, stopped him. He resisted. And let's just say we gave him a little pain compliance. Hannity chuckles at that. His mother back in Venezuela felt the vibrations. He's sucking concrete. The cops scraped him off the asphalt. Well, is it concrete or is it asphalt? Make up your mind. Anyway, he went on for this for a while, coming back to the main point. You shoplift, you commit crime, you assault people, you don't belong in our country, Sliwa said, and we're going to make sure you pay a price for that. But what Sliwa asserted is not at all what happened. New York City Police Department did detain the man attacked by the Guardian Angels. They told the New York Post that the man had not been shoplifting, but simply heckling the Guardian Angels during the Fox News shoot. One of those, First Amendment things. Who cares about that? Oh, unless you're the president. Then it's really super important. Or you were former president. Anyway, on Wednesday afternoon, the NYPD reported the man was also not a migrant, but a New Yorker from the Bronx. Total lie, top to bottom. Sliwa told the Associated Press, of course, I thought he was. He believed the man to have been an immigrant because he was speaking Spanish. Oh, no. About a quarter of New York City residents primarily do speak Spanish. Let's work backward to determine what the guy from the Bronx ended up being thrown to the ground by Sliwa's allies, why he unwittingly became the live-streamed face of immigrant crime in New York City. He was allegedly interrupting the Fox News live shot, though no disturbance was obvious during Sliwa's initial interview, by the way. No one could tell what was going on. Nothing. No one even knew anything was going on. Sliwa just announced something's going on. Something that wouldn't have happened had Fox News not been there, by the way. So they prompted it, is one way of looking at it. Fox News was there to have the right-wing leader of a vigilante organization opine on the dangers posed to a city by crime and immigrants to host Sean Hannity. That Hannity had long been close to Trump, the guy perhaps most invested in promoting the link between crime and immigration, may not be a coincidence. All of this could have been worse. The guy who was roughed up by the guardian angels could have been seriously hurt, for example. You never know, right? Fall down, hit your head on the concrete. This week saw an extreme example of how anti-immigrant rhetoric can trigger a potentially violent response, with the arrest of a Tennessee man who allegedly planned to head to the border with explosives to serve as a sniper. Well, you usually don't use explosives in the sniper game, but, he was going to do both. That Fox News carried the scuffle live was a function of a number of bad decisions, certainly, but all of them were downstream from the same point of origin, wanting to cast New York City, once again, as collapsing metropolis overrun by criminal immigrants. Or, as was actually the case, with hecklers from the Bronx, which, of course, used to be one of the charming aspects of hometown New York City. Oh well, we'll be back in 2 minutes with more.
Hi, I'm Scott Anderson, the guy that writes the daily summary for this show, Kagro in the Morning. Thank you to everyone that supports this show. Many of you send donations through PayPal, Patreon, Square Cash, Radio Public, and so on. Some of you write your own essays and send them in, or read articles with your own commentary. We appreciate it. Now, some of you are listening to this and thinking, I'd like to help, but isn't there something I could do that wouldn't require money or effort? Why, yes, there is. You can just like us. On Daily Kos, they call it the recommend button. YouTube has a thumbs up. There are hearts and likes and love buttons. Tap our love button. Tap our love button every day. Share our shows and summaries on Facebook and Twitter, YouTube and iTunes, Stitcher and Amazon. Most of these places allow you to write a review, so a sentence or two would be great. Recommend us to social media, or tell your friends to listen to the show. You aren't just helping us, you're helping them find their new favorite thing to listen to. You could change the world. So thank you in advance from me and everybody else in the world.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Speaking of whatever the hell it was we were speaking of, it seemed apropos at the time to bring this one to you, but we were interrupted by our 2-minute break. But what was the transition we were making? We were, of course, reading about right-wing rhetoric, about immigration, and most of it not being true, of course. I guess as part and parcel of our long-running theme that every Republican accusation is a confession, I just wanted to let you know that we found the weapons of mass destruction. We found the drugs at the border as well. Remember, the border area is being overrun by drug smugglers. Well, as it turns out, just like with caravans, the caravans are actually of crazy people who are dangerous to this country, are actually coming from the north, headed to the border. And along with them came the drugs, as it turns out. The Texas Observer reports that right-wing bloggers have been busted during a militia border tour, and you'll never guess what they were busted for, except for the fact that I already told you, basically. Near Eagle Pass, Texas, officers arrested bloggers for drug possession after receiving information that someone in a caravan was pointing a gun at migrants, DPS report says. How interesting is that? Okay, well, at least they're calling them caravans now and not convoys. The reporter on this one, Francesca D'Annunzio, tells the basic story, but it's a long one. I don't know if we're going to read all the way through it, although I'm sure it would be fascinating. If we had a 17-hour show, well, if only. Anyway, the Texas Department of Public Safety, that's the DPS we were talking about a second ago, recently arrested 2 right-wing bloggers riding in a caravan near Eagle Pass after finding what law enforcement described as a plastic bag containing a white powdery substance. also some marijuana, and THC edibles in their Mercedes SUV. Because economic anxiety, of course, which also reeked of cannabis, according to a police report obtained by the Texas Observer via a public records request. Now, naturally, as progressives, we do have to point out the hackneyed story of police detecting the strong owner of burning marijuana is a tried and true, method of executing a search that often ends up with, sometimes beating the crap out of people. But these are right-wing bloggers and white, but they are very sus looking, no doubt. They are, of course, it's not necessarily the case that anything is wrong with being heavily tattooed. But it's the sort of thing that police look at as suspect, despite the fact that the police are often heavily tattooed, or maybe even more heavily tattooed than the people they're arresting. But maybe the gigantic ZZ Top length beard on this ridiculous goofball in the photo might have tipped them off as well. Again, nothing in particular that goes on. It's absolutely profiling and totally wrong, but it's kind of funny when it happens to them because reasons. Schadenfreude. The Germans have a word for it, but they have words for everything. They just jam all the words together. They put a whole sentence together without spaces. Now it's a word. Unnecessary. Let me just make that complaint generally about the Germans. Though, tread lightly on the Germans. They're touchy people. Anyway, so here's the story. Celeste April Sparks and Jerry J. Pena Ahuyon. I'm guessing at the pronunciation here. They don't, even interestingly for the Texas Observer, they don't note any accent marks or tildes on this thing, so I have invented them myself. Pena Ahuyon. But it may just be that it is punctuated correctly. They are Texas publication. Maybe he's Pena Ahuyon instead of Ahuyon. Who, anyway, the two of these, Celeste and Jerry together, self-identify as independent journalists, which, whatever, we can understand. Well, they told the Texas Observer that they were stopped while giving a tour of the area to members of the United Patriot Party of North Carolina, described by police as a militia group on January 20th. Now, Pena Ahuyon, who goes by Pena, I guess, or at least just Pena anyway, also had a Smith & Wesson, although it's really Smith & Wesson, gun, per the report. That's interesting. In Texas reporting, they tell you what brand of gun you're carrying. We kind of led a little convoy. I love that Francesca has called it a caravan in her reporting. But in their speech, they say convoy. We let them follow us, Sparks told the Observer by phone. Both Sparks and Pena, since he goes by Pena, said that day was their first time meeting with the United Patriot Party of North Carolina. Both said they were unaware that the group was an armed militia and that they are not members. At the time of the arrests, they had been traveling with militia members who had allegedly pointed guns at migrants, according to DPS. DPS troopers arrived to investigate reports from a Federal Bureau of Investigation surveillance plane that migrants were possibly being held at gunpoint, per the report. That's probably what it looked like, although it is interesting, just again, along with the story we read yesterday about how just goofball idiot these northern southbound caravanners actually are. I guess, again, I mean, you never know when they're going to get dangerous because these people are so weird and unpredictable. But it is interesting to note that, this is the sum total of their effectiveness. They drove all these hundreds of miles to go down there and do something, take personal part in stopping the migrant flow. And here they are with actual migrants walking right past them with their guns out at them now. Not the migrants, they don't have guns, but these militia types are out there with the guns out, drawn, pointed at the migrants, and still the migrants don't stop. And still, thankfully, these militia wannabes don't fire any of the weapons. I don't want them to. Don't want them to become emboldened to do so. It's just interesting that, hey, push has come to shove. What are you going to do? And the answer is, I don't know, man. Let's get some weed, I guess, and maybe a white powdery substance. Maybe they're just more interested in the drugs. I don't know. So I don't know. I didn't actually mean to spend much time on what they were doing at the border so much as saying, hey, found the drugs at the border, and it turns out it's Americans, and headed in the opposite direction. But, that's funny too. But so is this, in a way. So anyway, members of the United Patriot Party of North Carolina who were out patrolling with Sparks and Pena were not arrested that day, though one man with the group, Jeremy Allred, was stopped and had multiple guns in his possession, according to the DPS report. The report said Allred admitted to police that he did brandish a rifle in the presence of migrants. To no great effect, as it turns out, I guess. Why, then, you might wonder. According to DPS, Allred has a prior conviction for domestic assault. The report says that DPS officers were told that federal prosecutors did not want to accept charges on Allred, but later advised that they will now accept federal weapons charges on Allred if he is encountered again. Well, why not just do it now? The encounter with the police did not deter Allred from taking to Facebook to post about his border activities. On January 21st, Allred posted the first of multiple videos documenting his activities near Eagle Pass. The first features desert scenes and the Mission Impossible theme song. Allred could not be reached for comment. I would love to have his comment on why are you making Mission Impossible style videos about how tough and awesome you are when you eventually did have migrants directly in your sight and your gun drawn on them. How come nothing happened? Is it because you're a cosplaying idiot? Yeah, I don't want to say it to him, though. I'm afraid we'll, prompt him to do something terrible. Anyway, although I have the feeling that we're reading a disaster story ahead of time now. Oh, the feds say, well, if he does anything next time. Like, why are you waiting for mass murder? Despite her and Pena's arrest for drug possession, Sparks said she travels to Eagle Pass and other places because of her concerns about law and order, except for the drugs, which I kind of like. At the migrant center in San Antonio, there were people smoking marijuana, and the cops just kind of brushed them off and let them keep walking on. They don't penalize them. If I were to do the same thing, I'd be locked up, or I'd get a fine or a charge or something, she told the Observer on February 3rd at the Take Back Our Border ranch rally in Quemado, exactly 2 weeks after DPS arrested her for possession of a controlled substance. Well, I don't know. I mean, maybe she's right. I got a charge. They didn't. Well, what are you going to do? You're an American citizen, and it's a little easier to make sure that you're going to show up for your court date. And how do you know what they did and didn't do to these migrants? You're just imagining things. So anyway, she goes on to say, if they would just teach them the same laws that we live under, then it would work. But they're just being let in freely with no control, she imagined, I guess. The police report provides more details about the duo's January arrest. A Federal Bureau of Investigation, you heard of them, FBI, surveillance plane observed armed members of a militia patrolling private property and became concerned about migrants possibly being held at gunpoint, which would mean that the spotting them with their guns brandished the next week would be that second time. Anyway, responding to the FBI's call, DPS dispatched an officer. When they arrived at the scene, police report says several vehicles raced off, including that black Mercedes SUV in which Sparks, Pena, and a third person were riding. Again, everybody, I don't have any black Mercedes SUVs. I don't have any red Mercedes SUVs. There's no Mercedes at all in my possession. But, that's because of how much economic anxiety they have. The officer made contact with several people, including the United Patriot Party of North Carolina militia president, Greg Gibson, who, per the report, said that all participants had come to the border to help stop illegal immigration, which they did by watching them walk past them. Sparks denies breaking the law. In a video streamed on January 23rd to a podcast on Rumble, Sparks said that the baggie with the white powdery drug the officers found in the Mercedes SUV, well, it wasn't hers. So she says she picked it up while she was out reporting by the border that same day. The idea, she said, was to get fingerprints or something of that sort and understand what's going on between the border and our migrant center in San Antonio. Yeah, I found it. and I needed to check it for fingerprints, which is why I picked it up with my own hands. Whoops. Well, guess what? The wheels of justice turn slowly, but there was a white powdery substance with your fingerprints all over it. Maybe you shouldn't be trying to do law enforcement if you don't know what the F you're doing. Or even if you do know what the F you're doing, you should not be trying to do law enforcement. Do whatever it is you do in civilian life. Go. On the podcast, Sparks said she shared her version of events with the police officer. I had just found that thing, but she added, he didn't want to hear it. Wow, isn't that something? On several occasions, Sparks has picked up small baggies with drugs while out filming, she said. I'll bet she has. And on several occasions, she's, money has fallen out of her hand and scooped up by someone else. It's not her fault what happens to money that she drops, carelessly. And then, I don't know what happened. The next thing I knew, there was a baggie in my pocket. Lieutenant Christopher Olivares, a spokesperson for DPS, said there are only 2 substances with a white and powdery appearance that could be related to the alleged possession of a Schedule I controlled substance, cocaine, and of course the one they were giving out in the White House, fentanyl. Right. But the department's analysis lab can take up to several months to complete testing. He said, at the time of an arrest, police cannot determine what a substance is based on its appearance alone. After the January 20th event, Sparks was taken to Maverick County Jail, he's a Maverick, and charged with possession of a controlled substance and released on a bail of $10,000. Pena was charged with possession of marijuana, possession of a controlled substance, and unlawful carrying of a weapon, and released on a total bail of $9,000. Interesting that his is $1,000 lower, really, with all the extra charges. Let's see. Sparks and Pena's cases remain under review. Okay, that's nothing new. If prosecuted, both said they plan to try to contest the allegations. That's not terribly surprising. Anything else? Not really. Both Sparks and Pena said they did not point guns at the migrants or see anyone else do so. But Sparks told the Observer that prior to her arrest, she heard some militia members make threatening remarks to a group of 5 migrants who were sitting on top of a hill. One of the migrants, Sparks said, was a 13-year-old and seemed pretty traumatized by members of the militia. At one point, I heard one guy say, "What are we going to do with them? Shoot them?" Sparks said. Another commented about pushing the migrants off a ledge, she added, and yet nothing happened. Imagine, though, coming from the other side, and now you cross the river to be met up by 5 more people with guns strapped around them, acting as if almost like their cartel themselves, she said about the armed militia members. Oh, she's close to getting it. It was very disheartening and dehumanizing. I mean, it is. I shouldn't laugh at that. She said, what is she doing now coming to this realization? Now she's in trouble for drugs. She's well, that's what they say, right? A conservative is a liberal who's been mugged, and a liberal is a conservative that's been indicted. Well, Sparks' description of the scenario is similar to a video that Allred posted on Facebook, which shows 5 migrants on a hill near a ledge overlooking the Rio Grande. In a similar video uploaded to Instagram, Gibson is seen with the same group of 5 migrants. While facing them, he said, "Y'all look as sketchy as beep today." I beeped myself there. How do you like that one? Meanwhile, have you seen the photos of the guys in the militia? Like I said, sketchy. The group's motto, according to its homepage, is by ballot, by choice, by bullet, if forced, the Republic will be restored. That's the United Patriot Party of North Carolina. And they claim to have arrived at Eagle Pass from at least January 20th through the 28th for what it calls Operation Hold the Line, a reference to a 1990s military show of force operation in El Paso, which was meant to deter migrant crossings. In a phone interview with the Observer, Gibson, the group's president, insisted that no one with his group pointed a gun at migrants. Why not? I thought you guys were tough. What really happened, he said, is that while watching people cross the river from a distance, a gentleman with his group did use his rifle looking through his scope in lieu of using binoculars. It was not a good idea, but he was not pointing the rifle at migrants. Oh, no? Well, then how did he see them through the scope? Would you have the scope on perpendicular Is that right? Perpendicular. Yes, right. Perpendicular to the aim of the rifle? Yeah, sure. Well, if you did, then why isn't it a good idea? I don't know. Anyway, in January, federal firearms charges were filed in Tennessee against Paul Fay, a man who told undercover agents that he was planning to travel to Eagle Pass as a sniper. Remember, we just heard about him earlier today, to meet a militia group referred to as the NC Patriot Party. I guess that's probably them. The FBI and a Tennessee federal court official would not comment on whether the NC Patriot Party is also known as the United Patriot Party of North Carolina. Online, the groups used the same logo. When asked about the logo, Gibson said, it's sort of a generic logo. I mean, it shows up across the internet. In an initial phone call, Gibson said he had absolutely nothing to do with the Tennessee man who was arrested last month, did not know him. After this story published, he called back to apologize. I didn't mean to lie to you, he said, adding that he did know Fay, but he knew him by the name Gunny. They're all named Gunny. Gibson said they spoke on the phone a few times and that Fay never talked about committing violence against police or immigrants. I did not get that vibe from that guy. Well, anyway, sounds like they're all full of it. I mean, there's more and considerably more, but I think maybe time to move on from this one. Feel free to peruse the rest of this article. It is sort of, again, fascinating. I love diving into the details just to see how sketchy and weird these people are at bottom. But there are a few other things that I thought I might share with you. So, yeah, feel free. I'll point you to that one. You can read all about it over the weekend if you like. Let's see. Other things that I thought I would share with you. There are several. Let's see. Who am I reading here if I go this direction? I mean, you know this, but I feel like in order to fill out even more details of the disaster that we potentially face with Trump running for re-election, I've been holding on to this piece from Josh Dawsey and Michael Scherer at the Washington Post. Republicans fear that they will be targets in Trump's retribution campaign. Oh my God, I can't believe this whole leopard thing. If only somebody had come up with an easily recognizable, easily repeatable, fun and entertaining meme to describe exactly what was going on, we would never have become involved. That's the headline. Subheader says the former president is already attacking those who have endorsed his GOP opponents or have crossed him in other ways. We know all about it, but perhaps it's time to fill in the blanks, recap the whole thing. Donald Trump has promised a presidency of retribution if he wins another term in office. Good reason not to let him do it. Many Republicans fear that they might face the brunt of it, but they're going to vote for him anyway in the hopes that it falls on someone else, right? The most irresponsible thing possible here. I might escape punishment personally, but many of my colleagues will fall under his boot. I'm voting for him. Keep your fingers crossed. The former president has threatened to have donors to his Republican opponent, Nikki Haley, permanently barred from his orbit, although, if you then go on Fox News and say, Trump is awesome, I'd love to help kill somebody he doesn't like, you'll get back in his orbit. It happens all the time. But, there are a few people that I hope get plowed under in the process. A top advisor has vowed to destroy the career, for instance, of Representative Bob Good of Virginia, the House Freedom Caucus chairman, after he endorsed another Trump challenger, Ron DeSantis. The Trump campaign has also attempted to condemn former aides who worked for his rivals during the GOP nomination fight and has twisted arms, demanding endorsements, telling lawmakers that Trump will remember exactly when they backed him. I doubt it, but he may remember it incorrectly. I mean, remember that most of the people who were in his orbit during the 4 years in which he was illegally occupying the office of the presidency of the United States, let's say, were people that had said he was an idiot, a moron, someone who had to be stopped, someone who was too disgusting to be president, whatever. I mean, Kellyanne Conway was among them, and then she was whispering in his ear for 4 years. So things change. It depends on what he sees on television that day. Anyway, what about DeSantis and the people who worked for Trump at one point who went on to these other campaigns? Well, comments like this one. MAGA disowns her and anyone else that associates/works with her. Read a recent Trump campaign social media message targeting the campaign's 2020 communications director for working last year to elect DeSantis. Traitor! In all caps, they say. Even House Speaker Mike Johnson has been dragged into the crossfire. Not him. One of his top political consultants, Jason Haber. Now, he's from Louisiana, so it's Hebert, right? Maybe, is that right? Like, didn't they have, wasn't there was a, NFL quarterback, right? Bobby Hebert, by the same name, but there's no accent mark here. But so it could be Jason Hebert, if you prefer, and maybe they say that, although Louisiana. Anyway, one of his top consultants of that name works for Axiom Strategies, a consulting company that advised the DeSantis presidential effort. Right into the ground, apparently. A Trump advisor called Johnson after he won the speakership to warn him not to work with Axiom, according to multiple people familiar with the call, who, like others, spoke on condition of anonymity because they were moral cowards and probably deserved to be lined up and shot one day, but now we won't know who. So we're just going to have to get them all. Dang, they foiled us again. Hebert, we'll call him, a college friend of Johnson's, is expected to start billing his work for Johnson through a company not tied to Axiom, one of the people said. It's a clever workaround, but it is cowardice nonetheless. The high-dollar donor community, which has been told in various ways to rally quickly behind Trump, has taken notice. Just a reminder to the high-dollar crowd that thought that they were living on FU money, that they weren't accountable to anyone because they were just too rich to have normal stuff apply to them. Turns out that a guy who really isn't rich and is about to be bankrupted by court fines against him, and probably, I don't know whether it's probable anymore, but certainly faces jail time. Just wanted to show you that how not FU level your FU money is. It looks to me like you're being effed more than anything else. Anyhow, people took that, the threat, as I am going to be president and I am going to investigate you, said Caton Dawson, a former South Carolina GOP chairman and Haley backer, when Trump threatened to punish her donors, that is to say, Haley's donors. There is always a threat. If you are not for him, he's against you. And also, by the way, if you are for him, he's against you anyway. Just thought I would let you know about that. Trump's top advisors say the efforts to cajole and punish within the party are not a central part of their strategy, and some close to Trump point out that the former president can be quick to forgive when it is in his interest. Trump has long distinguished himself as both surprisingly vicious and disarmingly transactional, often willing to forgive intractable enmity for short-term gain, or, by the way, do the opposite. Remember, not that long ago we were talking about, what was it? Oh, right, Alina Habba, his lawyer in the disastrous New York cases that he's currently in the middle of being destroyed in. Remember that she had said, I can't show up for court. I'm sick and I can't be there. And then it turns out that she was photographed at the New Hampshire victory parties for Trump. You remember that story. Do you remember also that that came to light because there was a guy at the party taking those pictures and Instagramming it or putting, I don't know, maybe it was on Truth Social or whatever it was. All that. Anyway, I do recall seeing, but I don't know if I remember relaying to you that he was ejected from that party, and he in fact videoed his ejection from the party and put it out on social media. And it was hilarious to watch because, of course, he considers himself to have been a super volunteer for Trump in New Hampshire, not only that year, but in years prior. And then he was like, on the state campaign committee that year. And how could this be happening? On his way out, he's telling everybody, all his friends, he's being ejected. And I don't understand how this could happen. I was so loyal to Trump. How could he do this to me? And, 5 seconds after, I'm sure he was right back on the Trump train. But it's not just Trump who's psychopathic about this stuff. It's also all of his supporters. And they really, honestly, they're like pet dogs. They live minute to minute. They have no idea what's happening in the future and forget all about the past. Except for who feeds them, I guess. I don't know. Anyway, just wanted to point that out. And, like I said, they conclude this article by pointing out, or they continue this article. Hours after DeSantis endorsed him, Trump stopped using his harsh nicknames, saying he was retiring them, and praised the Florida governor. What do you know? And then this past week, Trump's top aide, Susie Wiles, addressed some of the country's most affluent donors in Palm Beach, Florida. In her presentation, Wiles did not make threats and instead shared data and attempted to woo the donors with an approach that was more carrot than stick. People with knowledge of the meeting said the campaign is singularly focused on one thing, beating crooked Joe Biden, as they call him, and winning back the White House. Wow, they couldn't even come up with a new nickname. Crooked. Crooked Hillary Clinton. Crooked, Joe Biden. Oh, whatever. That was Stephen Chung, spokesman for the Trump campaign, in his statement. Anyway, you get the idea. There's lots more where that came from. Just something that you might consider reading. I just wanted to, put on record once again, that these people have learned zero lessons. Leopards eat their faces, and they just put masks on and then smear chopped liver all over the mask and invite the leopards back for a second meal, I guess. It's outrageous. It's crazy. It's a reason in itself not to allow Trump to return to power. Extremely dangerous, but you know that. All right, well, let's see. Time for us to wrap things up and hand the channel back for the day anyway, but it looks to me like Justice has got some travel scheduled, apparently, for over the weekend, and so no regularly scheduled West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy for this Friday, but there will be, of course, appropriately progressive programming for the channel, and then looks like we may have some similar situation on Monday. I'm being warned, just by way of housekeeping, that I guess our handoff has to be harder timed for the top of the hour, so I'm going to have to pay better attention to my alarms on Monday. But if I screw it all up, well, you won't hear the last couple seconds of me waxing poetic about how it's time to hand things over. Anyway, lots to read, lots for you to catch up on that I didn't get to in reading in totality on today's show, but that's your weekend assignment. We'll see you again on Monday.
From netrootsradio.com, you have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
All right, well, time to me to sign off and hand things over to Scott Anderson for the summary of today's show, which I know I'm supposed to do early today. He's got some scheduling issues as well. We got some busy weekends coming up, and and hey, isn't it our Lunar New Year? Chinese New Year, as they call it? Lunar, it's really up to the moon and not the Chinese.